Guten Tag, and welcome to my series Quarter of a Note. You have seen this series spoken entire on my other channel, the Star Wars Music Composer. By the way, please go follow that channel. I will turn that channel into relieving the duty of music and turning it into a Star Wars channel, while the musical content will be released on this channel in English. This series is meant to be a podcast about classical music specifically. So to reintroduce you to the world of classical music, I will be speaking it in English instead of the Thai language I've been speaking earlier. So today we're going to talk about each eras of classical music. Now, when I say classical music, I'm not time traveling fully extending back to like the beginning of Western music such as ancient Greek or ancient Roman. I'm going to talk from the era which is reckoned as fully classical music, and which we're going to start at the Baroque era from the 1600 AD to 1750 AD. Excuse me about that. So, during the time of the Baroque era, we recognize many composers. Specifically, we recognize Johann Sebastian Bach, Vivaldi, writer of Four Seasons, and Handel, writer of Hallelujah. So, one thing we'll definitely need to recognize is that the Baroque era is mainly music for the meaning of religion. So, music is obviously always written for a reason, and that reason can be anything from expressing your feelings to expressing others' feelings or serving a purpose. In this case, during the Baroque era, they served the purpose of religion, basically writing music for churches, writing songs with usual chords, and etc. That is mainly the era of Baroque music, and Baroque music that is widely known today mainly comes from Bach, Vivaldi, Handel, and all three of these write a similar style of music. Now, one thing to recognize about the era is that the world had just been introduced to the style of multi-line music, basically a music with multiple lines of voice. For example, two-part inventions, three-part inventions, toccata, fugue, and preludes by Bach. All of these are great examples to music which have many diverse lines of voice. For example, voice of high and voice of low, and the style of music we usually see as a gender during the Baroque era is usually polyphony, which meant all lines, nothing is more important than each other, but each of them have same styles and all of them have a role. So basically, for example, if we talk about two-part invention by Bach, we usually hear multiple lines of voice together. Instead of hearing many of the voices, maybe the melody is basically making sure the bass isn't actually as important as the melody. Instead, during Bach's time, all lines are the melodies. That is the Baroque era. Now we introduce ourselves to the Classical era. Now, here's when people get confused. People think classical music is referring to the classical era, basically 1750 to 1830. But actually, when we talk about classical music, we mainly meant Western music from the Baroque era to the modern era. And probably till today, for example, we talk about John Williams with Star Wars, Indiana Jones, something like that, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Those are also classical music, which can be seen to follow the rules of Western music theory and also using the orchestra and many of the Western music concepts and instruments instead of going in a more modern approach. For example, we don't count rock music despite being Western as classical music because sometimes it breaks the rules of actual music theory. However, all music styles are beautiful, and you can feel free to listen to any single musical style you want. Now, we're going to move into the classical era. Now, the classical era, we meant the era where music is meant to serve the noble, and I mean the royals. Now, one thing to be certain is that during this time, instead of we like trying to write music about ourselves, we have to write music to follow, the royals. Yes, they like good sound music with basic chords, something like that. So people won't get to introduce much of themselves. Instead, they write from themselves to connect with the other's ear. So music is following the public instead of following themselves. So the classical era is a pretty limited era. However, don't you think the music isn't beautiful? Because we are talking about Joseph Haydn, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, of course, everyone has heard of Mozart, Franz Peter Schubert, and Ludwig van Beethoven. About Ludwig van Beethoven, it can be debated because Beethoven is often known as a romantic composer. And then we are going to talk about the transition from classic into romantic. Now, some of the pieces I recommend you to listen to during this time is you may want to listen to Mozart's piano concertos. For Haydn, many of his symphonies are very good, and Schubert, obviously, I recommend listening to his Symphony No. 2 and his Great C Symphony. Basically, Symphony in C major by Schubert. It's nicknamed the Great Symphony. Now we're going to talk about the Romantic Era. Now, it's still debatable whether or not the Romantic Era began during which time and at which time. So we are going to use the most popular theory of where Romantic Era comes from. So we're talking about 1830 to 1900. So the other thing I would recommend you to do is to listen to a piece that many musicians marks the end of the classical era, and that is Beethoven's Symphony No. 3, Eroica, which we'll talk in later episodes. Now, I haven't been able to research for you guys the year of the song because, of course, this is about the history of classical music, not yet the history about the songs. I'll obviously be sharing the birth year of Eroica. I believe it's like 1804 or something like that. So, and during that time, it is believed that Eroica marks the transition from classical era into the Romantic Era. However, most people believe that 1830 is the beginning of the Romantic Era. Romantic Era you will see that most composers you are familiar with comes from the Romantic Era. We are talking about Johannes Brahms. We are talking about Felix Mendelssohn. We are talking about Schumann. We are talking about Sibelius. We are talking about Bedřich Smetana. We're talking about Richard Wagner or John Sibelius. We're talking about Antonin Dvorak. Okay, now all of these composers have written such great music that I cannot list all of them in one single video. So we'll be covering each composer one by one. Okay. However, it is noted that the Romantic Era introduces so many new styles of music because now people don't have to like, I have to like fit the note, I have to use the same chords over again. So what they can do, they can actually introduce their style of music into their music. For example, we look at Beethoven. His symphonies are much more longer than many of Mozart's symphonies, for example. Such as Eroica, we talk about Pastoral Symphony No. 6, we talk about Symphony No. 5, obviously everyone has heard of Ode to Joy, Symphony No. 9, and all of these are at least 1 hour long. So one thing to note for certain is that Romantic Era music is definitely longer than classical music because, of course, the royals don't have patience to listen to good music and to actually find out the good music and the movements of the symphonies, something like that. Now, the final era we'll be talking about is the modern era, basically from 1900 onwards till today. We're talking about people like Dmitri Shostakovich, Bela Bartok, John Sibelius is also a prominent member of this era. John Williams also is a very recognizable composer. Igor Stravinsky, Sergei Rachmaninoff. We'll see a lot of good Russian composer names. Peter Tchaikovsky, not very modern. Tchaikovsky is mainly recognized as romantic. So let's talk about some people. We are going to talk about people like Shostakovich first. Dmitri Shostakovich has introduced a new style of music into modern era alongside Bela Bartok because both of these composers had sent something into their music. And Shostakovich has used many, like the instruments many people don't use, and has infused every single instrument into his symphony. I recommend listening to Shostakovich Symphony No. 7 and Symphony No. 5 alongside that Symphony No. 11 and 15 to quite frankly understand the era of music. And for others of you who are wondering which are the songs I should listen to from the modern era, Bartok's piano pieces are very recognizable as well. Alongside that, you can try and listen to many of the new patriotic pieces. For example, John Sibelius's Finlandia, or Karelian Suite and Karelian Overture, also by John Sibelius. So, also, if you guys are a big fan of Star Wars, I recommend listening to John Williams. And for those of you who like good styles music and all the music infused into one single piece, Gustav Holst, because Holst are the planets. The song was finished during 1918 during World War I. I recommend listening to Holst's music as well. Very good indeed. And that is the each era of classical music. Now, of course, there are many more songs and pieces. There's thousands of pieces in the classical music repertoire and other composers that we could awfully listen to. So I will be introducing one by one each of every one of them. But I urge you to go search for these to listen as well. One thing for certain for my show, I might excerpt many pieces into the piano for you guys to actually listen. However, in the end, the real deal is literally on the internet. You can literally go find it. You can literally go search for it to listen for it. So, I recommend definitely listening to the pieces I've said to you today. For example, Eroica, for example, Pastoral, for example, Beethoven Symphony No. 5. If you want to go quite conservative, I recommend listening to Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21, Haydn's London Symphonies are very good as well. His Farewell Symphony also very good. You should go listen to it definitely. And yeah, that's about it. And as for Bach during the Baroque era, you will definitely know Vivaldi's Four Seasons. You've definitely heard of all of them before because it's used in a lot of films. It's also used as like music for other people. Surely you've heard the Dvorak's from the New World Symphony. And as promised, as for Bach, Toccata and Fugue, and alongside that, Period and Fugue and two-part inventions are very recommended. I recommend you listen to all these before listening to the next episode of Quarter of Note. So, see you guys next time. Please follow classical music. We do not want it to die from this world, I promise you. However, music is universal. Great music is universal. You can listen to any style of music you want. And of course, every single style of music is obviously beautiful. Who says rock music isn't beautiful? I listen to the Beatles literally every day. So, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and have learned a lot about music and Western classical music in particular. And we will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!